After Ollie Bearman's exceptional debut for Ferrari in Jeddah standing in for the injured Carlos Sainz, he has absolutely put himself in the shop window for a seat in 25 and also added yet another exciting element into what we already knew was going to be a crazy year in the driver market. However, when a young driver makes the sort of splash that he did with minimal preparation straight out of Formula 2, it resurfaces a conversation that we seem to have every 2 or 3 years with regards to older drivers taking seats away from younger drivers. Every single time that this conversation gets brought up, there is always one man's name that immediately gets brought up, and that's Fernando Alonso. After Jeddah, Ralf Schumacher, speaking about Bearman's debut and the difficulty for young drivers in general, said, "Money can beat talent because you have so much time in a kart or in a car that you can learn how to do it. But also to break this vicious circle so that young drivers get a chance again. And instead, Alonso, now 42, is going along. Nothing against Alonso, but it can't be the goal of Formula 1 to get older and older." And now, Schumacher wasn't the only one beating the younger, older driver drum after Jeddah, but he was the only one to call out Alonso by name, with other pundits like Naomi Schiff saying, "There are some drivers that have been blocking seats on the grid for multiple decades. This is not to say that they don't deserve their spots, but it would be great to see more young drivers coming through." And now, this conversation has always frustrated me whenever I've seen either fans or media bring it up, because in my opinion, the goal of Formula 1 shouldn't be to have a younger grid, it shouldn't be to have an older grid, it should be to have the most competitive grid possible. Now, this is a little bit of hyperbole by me, but I genuinely wouldn't mind if Fernando kept racing into his 50s, provided that he was still one of the best drivers on the grid and was beating his teammate who isn't a rookie. Because under those circumstances, it means that there is at least one driver who actually deserves to lose their seat ahead of Fernando on a performance basis, which at the end of the day is the most important metric that a driver should be judged by. I am not saying that other factors don't influence why some drivers get seats over others, like experience, the money they bring, or the sponsorship and exposure that they can allow the team to get, either through their personality or nationality. But at the end of the day, as long as they are outperforming their teammates in the same car, that to me trumps almost any argument that's not in favour of older drivers staying on the grid. And now, I would say that Jeddah is a unique circumstance, but a driver making their F1 debut with a last-minute call-up because another driver was injured has now happened 3 times in the past 3 years. Having said that, other than this specific type of circumstance, in general, I do agree that young drivers aren't given enough opportunities. But that's not the fault of drivers like Alonso or Hamilton. It's more so down to the lack of testing opportunities with all of these testing restrictions that we have, and it's also due to the fact that there are only 10 teams with 20 seats available, which is a seriously difficult problem to solve when the other teams themselves are too greedy to let a credible team like Andretti join Formula 1 and create 2 new seats. Or when you look at Alonso and Hamilton, even now they more than justify their place on the grid ahead of some younger drivers who also have plenty of experience. In the case of Lewis, even though he has had a rough start to the year which a lot of people have been jumping on, let's not forget that last year he dominated his younger teammate in the championship, and that is someone who is considered the future of Mercedes. And as for Fernando, people weren't calling for him to make way for younger drivers just a year ago when he was scoring all those podiums and single-handedly with just his points alone, dragging Aston Martin to 5th in the Constructors. And now, that is not to say, however, that there aren't drivers who are currently underperforming relative to expectations and are holding a seat which could go to a younger driver. Lance Stroll is the driver that immediately comes to mind. And now, we all know that Lance was brought into the team by his dad, and in the past, I have described him being there as artificial. He didn't naturally earn his seat based off performances or that he was an upgrade on the previous driver. He was artificially inserted into that team because his dad owns it, and in his 5 full seasons at the team under various names, he has never beaten a single teammate. The problem for Lance is that his level of ability caps the team's ultimate potential. Aston Martin have scaled up to challenge for podiums and wins like we saw last season. But the problem is that when they had a car capable of those results, only one of their drivers was actually good enough to achieve the results that the car was capable of. Given the uncertainty over Alonso's future, I don't think that they're the type of team that can risk having a rookie in their car, especially if Alonso leaves, because you cannot have a rookie alongside Lance Stroll as your driver lineup. They have to absolutely have a guaranteed top-level driver in at least one of their cars, and that is why in a recent video I said that Carlos Sainz to me is the absolute perfect candidate as either Alonso's replacement or Alonso's teammate. The team currently has Felipe Drugovich on their books, and in the one practice session that he did with Lance Stroll last season, he finished ahead of Lance and looked more than respectable. When he won his F2 title in 2022, dominating the likes of Théo Pourchaire, Liam Lawson and Logan Sargent, it was in his third season in the series, which I think is why in the eyes of some of the teams, he didn't immediately then warrant a seat in Formula 1. But I think his bigger problem is both timing and also the team that he's aligned with. Aston Martin barely have one seat available if Lance Stroll is kept on, and I also don't see Aston Martin being able to pull strings by finding Drugovich a seat in one of the other teams. Another driver who's coming under a bit of pressure after the opening few races is Daniel Ricciardo. Liam Lawson is the young driver who would be Ricciardo's obvious replacement given how impressive he was in the few races that he did last season. Even when Ricciardo was announced for 2024, there was still quite a few fans that felt it wasn't fully justified given Liam's performances. Ricciardo was kept on at RB partly because commercially he's very valuable to the team, but mostly because he's being assessed as a potential Checo replacement at Red Bull for 2025. However, for that to even be a possibility, he's not only got to be beating Tsunoda, he's got to be dominating him. And so far it has been the other way around, with Ricciardo's raw pace in qualifying looking very worrying and reminiscent of his time at McLaren. When you have a genuine young driver who deserves a chance, although people love Ricciardo for the character that he is and the driver that he was, if he isn't able to find that form and beat Yuki, then I do think he starts to fit into that category of older drivers who are taking seats away from younger and more deserving drivers. The next driver under obvious pressure is Kevin Magnussen. And now, the tricky thing about K-Mag is that he actually helped the team during a very difficult time when they were struggling with their previous young drivers, Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. That prompted Haas to basically abandon young drivers altogether when Gunther Steiner was still the team principal, in favour of a more sensible and experienced driver lineup, with Hülkenberg joining the team in 2023. However, after impressing in 22, K-Mag then really disappointed in 23 to the point where he definitely is a driver under pressure now. Even in Jeddah, as good as his drive was holding up half the grid to help his teammate, let's not forget that the reason why the team could put him in that position in the first place was because he himself got 20 seconds worth of penalties and ruined his own race. And now Ollie Bearman is the obvious candidate for that Haas seat, and even team principal Ayu Komatsu said that, despite the fact that he couldn't watch Bearman's race for himself because he was obviously busier watching his own team's race, after his free practice outings last year for the team, they already knew that Bearman was a very special driver who's going to be on their radar for 2025. And now Bearman can't let all of this attention get to his head too much. I think that Fred Vasseur, with all of the experience that he has of working with young drivers like Lewis Hamilton in the lower formula, has done the absolute right thing by playing down expectations and telling Bearman to fully focus on his Formula 2 campaign. You don't want a young driver to lose that hunger after one impressive performance and let all of that praise and adulation get to their head. Bearman has firmly put himself at the front of the shop window with his incredible Ferrari debut, but he can't just relax and think that he's already guaranteed a seat for next year. Another young driver who revealed his frustration of not being given an opportunity is Théo Pourchaire, who was the 2023 Formula 2 champion and is also a Sauber Academy driver. And now, when it comes to Sauber's lineup, we already know that the team is chasing the likes of Carlos Sainz to be their next star driver for when Audi come in, but when it comes to their current driver lineup of Bottas and Zhou, whilst I'm not saying that there aren't better drivers out there, I think the team is letting them down more than they're letting the team down. Bottas I still think is perhaps even an underappreciated driver when he's actually given a decent car, and I also think Zhou has developed into a really solid driver and has actually had a quietly strong start to the season if you've been paying attention. I think the bigger problem at Sauber isn't the drivers, it's the team. Over the past 3 years, their car has been really uncompetitive. Strategically, the team makes a lot of mistakes. Reliability has been awful for both of the drivers. And on an operational level, they've already had 2 disastrous pit stops in 2 races that screwed both of their drivers. This is one of those teams that I wouldn't blame for replacing either of their driver for someone younger or better, but they themselves haven't put their own drivers in a position to succeed enough to warrant dropping either. Those are just some of the younger and older drivers that are fighting it out for seats in 2025, but now it's over to you. Who do you think is holding up a seat on the current grid that perhaps doesn't deserve it? And which young drivers stand out to you right now in the lower formula as ones that you feel deserve to be considered for a seat in 2025? Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.